Sandra Bullock ran. Not off stage, not toward an exit. She stood up from her chair, moved around the edge of the desk, stepped down from the stage, and went into the audience at a pace that made two production assistants take an involuntary step forward, because nothing in the rundown had accounted for this. Jimmy Fallon sat behind the desk with his hands still open in front of him, mid-gesture, mouth still shaped around a word he had not finished. 300 people in Studio 6B turned in their seats all at once. It was a Wednesday evening in October. Sandra Bullock had been a guest on the show before. Nothing about any of those appearances had ended with the entire crew holding their breath while she moved through a seated audience toward a woman in row 3 who was already rising to meet her. The Tonight Show had booked Sandra Bullock for a Wednesday slot to discuss a project she had been quiet about for most of the year. The audience that night had the specific warmth of a crowd that arrives having already decided to enjoy itself without reservation. People who had driven in from New Jersey and Connecticut and as far as Philadelphia specifically because she was on the bill. There was no ambivalence in that room. The audience loved her before she cleared the curtain, and the love was the uncomplicated kind built over decades of watching someone be exactly who they are. When she walked out, the applause had the quality of something genuine rather than reflexive. The floor manager, who had worked in live television for 17 years, later told a colleague she had never walked into a pre-show that felt so immediately, unguardedly warm. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it had been scheduled. Near the end of the first segment, Jimmy reached under the desk and produced a manila envelope. He set it in front of them and told Sandra he wanted to show her something before they went to break. Not a clip, not a segment, just a photograph. Not a production still, not a posed image, just a photograph. Old, the color slightly faded the way genuine color fades, the edges soft after decades folded inside an envelope. He said a woman in Nuremberg, Germany had mailed it 3 weeks ago, along with a letter. Jimmy slid it across the desk. Sandra Bullock picked it up. She looked at it for 1 second. 2. Her expression shifted in a way that had nothing to do with the interview they had been having. Recognition arriving faster than language. She looked up from the photograph and directly into the audience, not at Jimmy, not at the cameras, scanning the rows with rapid, deliberate attention, the way you look when you know the face is somewhere in the room. She found it in row 3. She set the photograph down. She stood. She went. "Sandy," Jimmy said. She was already at the edge of the stage. The entire studio froze. Sandra Bullock was moving through the audience, and not one of the 300 people in that building understood what they were watching. The cameras kept rolling, but no one behind them called a direction. The wrong assumptions moved through the room. Had she seen someone she knew? Was something wrong? 300 people held their breath. Jimmy had not moved from behind the desk. He was looking at the photograph she had left face up, an old photograph of 2 people backstage in a theater. A woman in her 50s with steady eyes and both arms full of costume fabric, and a girl of about 13 with her hair pulled back, leaning in toward the woman to see what she was holding. Jimmy picked it up carefully, his voice barely above a whisper, but caught perfectly by his microphone. He said, "She looks exactly like her. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1977. Sandra Bullock wasn't always Sandra Bullock, Oscar winner and one of the most enduringly beloved actresses of the last 30 years. In the summer of 1977, in the backstage corridors of a mid-sized opera theater in Nuremberg, West Germany, there was a 13-year-old girl named Sandra Bullock, who had accompanied her mother on tour and did not yet know what to do with the restlessness she carried everywhere she went. Her mother, Helga, was a soprano soloist performing a summer season with a theater company. Sandra had traveled to German stages with her since she was old enough to, and she was fluent in the language and at ease in theaters. But at ease was not the same thing as settled, and at 13 she had not found the word yet for what she was always looking for when she stood in the wings. Hannelore Fisher, Nora, to everyone who worked with her, had been the wardrobe mistress at the Nuremberg Theater for 22 years. She was 57 that summer, precise and unhurried, a woman who moved through costume racks with the certainty of someone who had spent 2 decades making sure every button was where it was supposed to be before every curtain. She had a husband, 2 grandchildren, and a garden she tended on Sunday mornings before anyone else was awake. She had never wanted to stand on a stage. She had always understood, without needing it spoken, that the work she did was what made the thing on the stage possible. She noticed the girl within the first 3 days, not because the girl was in the way, she was careful not to be, but because the girl was watching. Not the singers, not the spectacle. She was watching the crew, the rigging, the act change choreography, the wardrobe team working in silence with no margin for error. Nora stopped mid-task and looked at her directly. She asked, in German, "What are you looking at?" Sandra Bullock said, also in German, "I want to understand how it works." Nora told her to follow her. For the 3 weeks of the run, Sandra spent every available hour backstage alongside Nora. She learned how stage light changed the color of fabric. She learned what a fast costume change looked like from the inside. 60 seconds, total darkness, no margin of error. And near the end of the 3rd week, in an empty rehearsal hall, with Nora pressing a costume at the ironing board, Nora told her to step up onto the rehearsal platform and say something. Anything. Sandra Bullock stood on that small wooden platform and spoke a single line from a play she had been reading. In English. Because she was nervous, and the English came faster than the German when she was nervous. Nora set down the iron. She looked at the girl for a long moment. Then she said, "You have something that cannot be taught. What you do with it is your choice. But do not waste it." At the end of the season, Helga's engagement concluded, and they returned to Virginia. Sandra wrote to Nora once, in German, from her school in Arlington. Nora wrote back. Then the years moved as years move, and the correspondence stopped, not from any unkindness, but in the way things stop when life moves faster than letters. Nora Fisher retired from the theater in 1994. Her husband passed in 2006. She moved to a smaller apartment in the same Nuremberg neighborhood and spent her remaining years with her granddaughter Lena, who had her grandmother's precise attention and her grandmother's habit of becoming very still when she was listening to something that mattered. Nora was diagnosed with cancer the previous year. She passed away peacefully at home 6 weeks before that Wednesday in October. She was 86 years old. In her final weeks, she organized her belongings with the same care she had applied to everything in her working life. Inside a small wooden box on her desk, Lena found an envelope containing a letter in German, addressed to Sandra Bullock, written 3 weeks before Nora died. It was short and direct, and without sentiment, exactly as she had done everything. She asked Lena to send it. She wanted her to feel like a person, not a moment. Lena mailed the letter and the photograph to The Tonight Show the week after the funeral. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Sandra Bullock had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. When the production team reached her management and explained the photograph and the letter, Sandra had asked one question. Would Nora's granddaughter be in the building? She was told yes. She told no one what she was going to do when she saw the photograph. She told the segment producer only, "Please don't stop me." But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Sandra Bullock had crossed the audience floor and reached row 3 before the cameras tracked her. The director switched to the wide shot, which is the only reason anyone watching at home could see what happened next. A woman in her mid-30s had risen from her aisle seat, and the two of them had come together in the space between rows. And Sandra had taken the woman's face in both hands, and whatever she said in that first instant, no microphone in the building was close enough to capture. Jimmy, from behind the desk, said very quietly, "What is happening right now?" Lena Fisher was 34, and she had her grandmother's stillness. She had been told she would be in the audience, and that the segment might involve the photograph and the letter. She had not been told Sandra Bullock knew she was there. Sandra Bullock held her by both arms. "You have her eyes," she said. "Exactly. Everyone says that," Lena said. "She told me I had something that couldn't be taught." Sandra's voice was not steady. "I was 13. I have thought about that sentence every single time something has been genuinely hard." Lena reached into the bag at her feet and brought out the small wooden box, corners worn smooth, lid stiff from decades of careful opening. She held it out. Sandra Bullock took it in both hands and opened it. Inside was the folded letter, and beneath the letter a small square of dark blue silk, a scrap from a costume, Lena said quietly, that her grandmother had kept because it was the exact color of the coat the girl from America had been wearing the last evening of the summer season. Sandra looked at the silk for a long moment. Her hands were not steady at all. She kept a piece of fabric for 47 years. She kept everything that mattered, Lena said. She was very organized. Sandra Bullock laughed, sharp, sudden, entirely real. "She was the most organized person I have ever met. Nothing was ever out of place. She said you were the only person she had ever seen who watched the work instead of the stage," Lena said. "She said that was how she knew." Sandra looked at her. "Then, I still do. Every set I walk onto, I look at what's holding the thing up before I look at what the thing is." "She would have liked knowing that," Lena said. Jimmy Fallon had come around the desk. He was standing at the top of the audience steps, with one hand pressed flat against his face, watching. He had been there without speaking for nearly 2 minutes. He looked once at the camera, then back at the two of them. Then, quietly, to no one in particular, "Folks, I think we need to let this happen." No one disagreed. Questlove set his sticks on the rim of the snare and stood up behind the kit. The director did not call for commercial. The camera operator closest to row 3 did not pull back. The standing ovation started somewhere in the center of the room and moved outward like a wave until the entire studio was on its feet, and Lena Fisher was standing in the aisle holding the wooden box with Sandra Bullock's hands around hers, and neither of them was looking at any of it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the cameras stopped, Sandra Bullock stayed in the building for nearly 2 hours. She and Lena sat together in a room the production staff cleared and left to them without being asked. She read Nora Fisher's letter twice, slowly, in the careful German of someone reading something in a language they have not spoken in years, and find, to their surprise, still fully present. The wooden box, the letter, the square of dark blue silk, left the building with her that night. She later said she keeps it on the shelf directly in front of where she sits when she works, so that it is always the first thing she sees when she looks up from the desk. Lena still lives in New York. She tends a small garden on her balcony on Sunday mornings. She inherited that from her grandmother, along with the capacity for silence, and the understanding that the most important work is usually the work nobody in the front of the house can see being done. You do not always know, when you tell someone a true thing at exactly the right moment, that they will carry it for 47 years. Nora Fisher knew. She said it anyway. Some lessons only need to be said once, in a cold rehearsal hall, to a 13-year-old girl standing on a wooden platform, speaking in the wrong language because she is too nervous to find the right one.